These are the 1984 to 85 GMC RTSs. The RTS-04s are the private bus lines. Now they were ordered for the NYC DOT for local and occasional express bus service, and the private bus lines embraced the RTS-04s as they did earlier with the 1979 GMC RTS-03s for the Queens private bus lines. And in 1984 to 85, the NYC DOT helped the private bus lines purchase 278 RTS-04s for the Queens and Brooklyn private bus lines, with 176 being T8J204 models and 102 being T8J604 models. Now the T8J604 models were a bit of a rarity in New York City as they were 96 inches wide, while New York City Transit as well as the other Queens private bus lines only ran the standard 102-inch wide RTSs. So, without further ado, let's go through the list of depots of private bus lines and fleet numbers of these RTS-04s. Here we go! So 351 to 394 were delivered to Command Bus Company and were painted in green and yellow, with 351 to 356 being 1984 models and 357 to 394 being 1985 models. 640 to 715 were delivered to Triborough Coach and were painted in red and white, while some were later given the red and gray lightning bolt scheme. Triborough Coach operated the largest fleet of private bus line GMC RTS-04s, with 76 in total. Anyway, 221 to 292 were delivered to Green Bus Lines, and were painted in green, of course, with 221 being the 10,001st RTS ever built, and was renumbered as 10,001 to honor its historical significance. 501 to 529 were delivered to Jamaica Bus, and were painted in tan and brown, then were later given the maroon, tan, and brown scheme, while 205 to 243 were delivered to Queens Transit Corp, and were painted in orange and white, while last but not least, 24 to 42 were delivered to Steinway Transit, and were also painted in orange and white. Steinway and Queens Transit later merged into Queens Service Corp in 1988. Also, speaking of which, they also owned the largest fleet of T8J604 built RTSs in New York City, with 58 units in total, and was also the largest owner of the T8J204 RTS, period. That's one for the RTS history book. Command RTSs 362, 366, 367, as well as 378 and 381, along with 383 to 394, were later given to Green Lines and were renumbered as 636 to 659, while 375 to 377 were later given to Jamaica Bus and were renumbered as 581 to 583. So these RTS-04s were pretty interesting to say the least. Like their fellow cousins at New York City Transit, they featured push-type rear doors, but also had some differences, such as roll signs as opposed to flip dots, as well as no rear destination signs, as well as all the windows being openable, as well as the lack of hoodlamp lights and the overall interior configuration. And they also featured amber rectangular reflectors above the headlights, as seen in this photo of Green Lines 270. And these GMC RTSs signify the use of the Detroit Diesel 6V92 engine, which sounds like this. I have so many memories of these RTS 04s, from Green Line's Queen Surface Corp, Jamaica and Command mostly, even though I didn't get a chance to ride on the Triborough coach units, but I do remember seeing them along the way. But, oh well. So as for these RTSs, they were good buses overall, and served the private bus lines really well, with the exception of some nitpicks from some passengers, drivers, and of course mechanics. But hey, what can you do? What I liked about these RTSs was their overall configurations compared to their cousins at New York City Transit. And coming from somebody who grew up in Manhattan, I always looked forward to seeing these in Queens and Brooklyn, and of course Lower Manhattan when they would run for the express lines. Now as for my personal favorites, it's hard to choose, but I have to say the Jamaica Bus units along with the narrow-body T8J204 RTSs stood out the most. When MTA Bus took over the private bus lines, 70% of these RTSs were retained and renumbered, and by 2006, roughly 196 RTS-04s remained in service. So, here's a list of RTS-04s that were renumbered. So 318 to 328 were ex-command units, while 1110 to 1136, with the inclusion of 1191, were ex-Jamaica units. 4221 to 4265, with the inclusion of 4277, along with 5835 to 5857, were ex-Green Line units. Well, last but not least, 7050 to 7094 were ex-Triborough units. Unfortunately, the Queen Surface Corp units were the first to be retired several years earlier, therefore they did not survive the takeover. Many were scrapped, while others were sold to Lafayette and Greenville Bus in Jersey City. It is sad to say that these RTSs are now retired, but luckily, Green Line's 221 has been preserved in the museum fleet under its historical fleet number, 10001. Now I wish they could have preserved one of the 96-inch wide T8J204 RTSs as well, but hey, it is what it is. So as for these GMC RTS 04s, they're gone, but definitely not forgotten. So with that being said, this is Kal-El saying stay safe, stay well, and of course, thanking you guys for watching.
Everything changes.